The room was sealed, not ceremonially but practically, the way people seal a space when they know they are saying something that cannot be taken back. Oil lamps breathed softly along the stone walls, their light unsteady, casting shadows that seemed to lean in closer than shadows should. The teacher, called Elian now, not by the name history would later burn into stone, did not stand at the center. He sat low, almost casual, as if what he was about to do required no effort at all. The others watched him with a mixture of hunger and restraint. These were not crowds, not seekers. They were the ones who had already crossed the first threshold and learned that the world was not governed the way it pretended to be. They had learned silence. They had learned how to listen without grabbing. Still, something in the air made their breathing shallow. Elian lifted his head, eyes calm, not lifted toward heaven, not closed in appeal. He looked straight ahead, as if addressing something that could not be seen but could certainly hear. He did not ask. He did not plead. He spoke a sequence of sounds that did not resemble prayer at all. It was closer to recognition, like saying a true name out loud after remembering it in a dream. The lamps flickered violently. One of the listeners, Merrick, younger than the others, still carrying the reflex of fear, felt a pressure in his chest, like gravity had briefly increased. He later described it as the world not liking what had just been spoken. Another, older and steadier, noticed something subtler, the silence behind the sound, as if layers of static had briefly dropped away. Elian stopped. That was it. No follow-up. No explanation. He did not wait for approval, because approval was irrelevant. He watched the room instead, watching the watchers. This, he said calmly, is why they taught you to beg. The sentence landed harder than the sound that came before it. He explained without lecturing, the way one does when describing a mechanism rather than a belief. The structures governing the world, he said, were not gods in any meaningful sense. They were administrators. Pattern keepers. They fed on repetition, on emotional output that stayed within predictable ranges: fear, guilt, hope deferred. Anything that surged upward without submission slipped past their nets. Begging was safe, Elian said. Begging produced noise they could harvest. Recognition did not. Someone asked why the teachers of the law never spoke this way. Elian smiled, not unkindly. Because you cannot govern a system, he replied, once people stop asking it for permission. He described the world as layered, not vertically but by density. Lower layers were loud and crowded, full of rules, rituals, and endless commentary. Higher layers were quiet. Signals traveled there without words, without drama. The trick was not climbing upward but shedding weight, emotional static, inherited fear, the constant need to be seen. Merrick felt exposed. He realized how often he performed devotion instead of inhabiting it. How often his inner life was shaped like an audience. Elian stood now, slowly, and placed his hand against the stone wall. They listen for strain, he said. For effort. For panic wrapped in sacred language. His hand pressed flat. They cannot hear this. He did not say what this was. He didn't need to. The room understood. The silence had thickened, not heavy but alive, like the pause before a storm that never breaks. A distant sound rolled through the city outside, metal striking metal, a shout, then nothing. Life continued, unaware that a boundary had just been brushed from the inside. Elian warned them gently. This knowledge was not armor. It would not make them powerful in the way power was usually imagined. In fact, it would make them less interesting to the system, which was both a blessing and a danger. When the structures could not feed, they destabilized. When they destabilized, they reacted. You will feel it, he said. Not as punishment. As interference. Distraction. Old memories resurfacing for no reason. Sudden fatigue after clarity. He paused. Do not dramatize it. Drama is food. The group laughed softly, tension breaking just enough. Before they left, Elian made them repeat nothing. No mantra. No vow. He only asked them to notice, in the coming days, the difference between asking and recognizing. Between speaking to be heard and speaking because something true had aligned inside them. As they filtered out into the narrow streets, Merrick felt strangely light, then suddenly tired, as if something unseen had reached out and missed him by inches. He did not turn back. He kept walking, holding the quiet like a fragile flame that did not want to be protected, only left alone. Days passed without ceremony. No thunder, no visions, no sudden mastery of hidden forces. That, Elian had warned, was the first test. The system rarely reacted with spectacle. It preferred suggestion. Subtle nudges back toward the familiar. Merrick noticed it first at night. His dreams became crowded again, filled with arguments that never resolved and faces he hadn't seen in years. Old guilt resurfaced, oddly specific, like a ledger being reopened. During the day, he felt an impulse to explain himself to people who hadn't asked for explanations. It took effort not to obey that impulse. When they gathered again, Elian listened more than he spoke. He let them describe what had happened without correcting the language they used. Only after they finished did he begin to map the pattern. The structure feeds on compression, he said. On reducing awareness into emotion, then looping that emotion until it feels like identity. Fear was the easiest fuel, but not the only one. Hope could be harvested too, as long as it stayed postponed. Even devotion could be consumed, if it remained performative. He explained that most religious systems were not created to deceive outright. They were retrofitted. Interfaces layered over something older and cleaner. Over time, the interface became the point. Ritual replaced recognition. Repetition replaced contact. Prayer, as you were taught, Elian said, is a broadcast. Loud, emotional, repetitive. Perfectly audible to the lower administrators. He paused. Calling, what you experienced, is not a broadcast. It's alignment. Nothing travels outward. Something clicks into place. Someone asked why the world felt so heavy if this was true. Elian answered by describing density again, but this time using a simpler image. Imagine standing in deep water while wearing soaked clothing. The water wasn't the problem. The weight you refused to release was the demiurgic system. He avoided naming it too often, could not create awareness. It could only manage it once it collapsed into predictable patterns. Human beings, he said, were taught very early to collapse themselves. Through shame. through reward. Through the constant suggestion that something was missing and must be earned awareness, he said, is rented awareness. Merrick felt that sentence lodged somewhere deep. He realized how much of his inner life was built around earning states, peace, approval, certainty, rather than allowing them. Elian warned them about rebellion. The system expected rebellion. It could metabolize anger just as easily as obedience. What it could not process was disengagement without contempt. Calm refusal. Clear seeing without commentary. This was why, Elian said, dramatic spirituality often led nowhere. The visions, the battles with imagined darkness, the heroic narratives of awakening, they all produced intensity, and intensity was still nourishment. What slips through, he said quietly, is boring. That surprised them. Boring did not mean empty. It meant undramatized. A stable signal without spikes. Recognition without performance. That he taught them how interference worked. After moments of clarity, the system often sent compensatory noise, sudden doubts, emotional swings, fatigue, distractions framed as urgency. None of it was personal. All of it was automated. The trap, Elian said, is thinking you have failed. Failure generated shame. Shame pulled awareness back down into loops the system could read. Instead, he instructed them to notice interference the way one notices weather. No argument. No meaning-making. Just observation. Merrick tested this over the following days. When fear arose, he did not fight it. When doubt whispered that he was imagining everything, he didn't counter it with belief. He simply noticed the texture of the thought, the timing, the way it arrived right after moments of stillness. Something unexpected happened. The thoughts lost urgency. They still appeared, but they felt flatter, like echoes without a source. Elian explained why. The system predicts engagement, he said. It does not understand non-participation. This did not make life easier in conventional terms. In fact, some relationships became strained. People noticed Merrick was less reactive, less hungry for validation. A few accused him of arrogance. Others sensed distance where there was only quiet. Elian had prepared them for this too. When you stop feeding a pattern, he said, the pattern tries to provoke you into proving you're still inside it. The key, he reminded them, was not withdrawal from life but clarity within it. Speak when necessary. Act when appropriate. But do not narrate your own awakening. Narration turned experience back into performance. Before they parted, Elian summarized the mechanics simply. Recognition aligns you beyond interception, authority comes from clarity, not force, and command is not spoken outwardly but held inwardly without strain. Do not rush, he said. The system runs on urgency. What you are learning operates outside of time. Merrick walked home that night without the heaviness he used to carry. The city looked the same, sounded the same. But something fundamental had shifted. The noise no longer felt like it was about him. The practice Elian offered was almost disappointingly simple. No posture, no sacred hour, no special words reserved for altered states. He told them to begin at night, not because night was mystical, but because the system was loudest when people were tired. That was when patterns tightened their grip. Before sleep, he said, notice the moment you usually hand yourself over. Most people, he explained, surrendered unconsciously. They replayed the day, rehearsed tomorrow, drifted into worry or fantasy. Awareness dimmed, and the system took over smoothly. The intervention was not to fight sleep, but to stay present a few seconds longer than usual. Merrick tried it that same night. He lay still, eyes closed, breath unforced. Thoughts rose immediately, unfinished conversations, imagined futures, small regrets. He didn't suppress them. He watched. When the familiar pull toward unconsciousness arrived, he didn't resist. He recognized it. That was the entire move.no declaration. No inner shout. Just a quiet noticing that felt oddly like standing upright inside himself. Something subtle happened. The thoughts lost cohesion, like a story forgetting its own plot. There was no vision, no surge of light. Just a clean gap. Awareness without commentary. The next day, interference arrived on schedule. Fatigue hit mid-morning for no physical reason. An old memory surfaced, charged with emotion. For a moment, Merrick almost believed he had done something wrong. Then he remembered Elian's warning. Do not dramatize. He let the sensations pass without naming them. They dissolved faster than expected. When they met again, Elian nodded as Merrick spoke. That gap, he said, is the signal. He explained that the system was excellent at tracking content, thoughts, emotions, beliefs, but nearly blind to pure awareness. When awareness remained uncollapsed, there was nothing to intercept. No signal to reroute. No leverage. This is why authority was never about dominance, Elian said. It's about coherence. Authority, as he defined it, was not asserting will over reality. It was refusing fragmentation. A stable internal alignment that did not fluctuate with circumstance. Commands issued from that state did not sound like commands at all. They felt inevitable. He cautioned them again about expectations. Awakening was not an upward spiral. It was a flattening. Peaks and valleys evened out. Life became quieter internally, which could feel unsettling at first. Many turn back here, Elian said, because silence feels like loss when you are addicted to intensity. Merrick understood. Part of him missed the emotional highs of seeking, the sense of being special for searching. That, Elian explained, was the final hook. Identity built around awakening was still identity. Over time, Merrick noticed changes that were practical rather than mystical. He reacted less quickly. He listened more than he spoke. Situations that once triggered anxiety now registered as neutral information. People either adjusted or drifted away. At night, the gap returned more easily. Sometimes only for seconds. Sometimes longer. He never chased it. Chasing collapsed it immediately. One evening, during a particularly still moment, he felt a familiar pressure, like the one from the sealed room weeks ago, but weaker, more distant. It passed without effect. He slept deeply. Elian explained later that this was the system testing boundaries, not attacking. Automated checks, nothing more. If you do not respond, he said, they stop knocking. The final instruction Elian gave was almost anticlimactic. Live normally, he said. Pay your debts. Care for people. Do your work. just don't forget what you are. No mission. No expansion plan. No urgency. Merrick realized then that the real escape was not leaving the world, but no longer being internally governed by it. The cage had never been physical. It was attentional. As the weeks went on, the practices faded into the background. They were no longer practices. They were orientation. Awareness stayed with him like a low, steady hum, unnoticed until contrasted with old noise. When the group eventually stopped meeting, there was no sadness. Elian had already withdrawn, quietly, as if his role was complete the moment they no longer needed him. Merrick never spoke publicly about what he learned. Not out of secrecy, but because explanation felt unnecessary. Those who were ready recognized the signal without words. Those who weren't would only hear noise. The world continued as before. Systems hummed. Patterns repeated. But for those who had learned to hold the gap, the machinery no longer felt personal, and that made all the difference. That if you've stayed with this story to the end, notice what didn't happen. There was no final revelation, no dramatic victory, no promise that life suddenly becomes perfect. That's intentional. Real awakening rarely looks impressive from the outside. It looks like clarity replacing urgency. Like silence replacing performance. This story isn't meant to convince you of anything. It's meant to remind you of something you already recognize at a deeper level, the difference between asking and remembering, between effort and alignment. If any part of this felt strangely familiar, let that be enough. You don't need to chase it or label it. Take what resonates and leave the rest. Let the ideas settle naturally. The system thrives on reaction, not reflection. Simply noticing that changes everything. If this video brought you a moment of stillness or a new angle of understanding, consider supporting the channel so we can keep exploring these deeper layers together. You can do that by subscribing for future stories, tapping like if this resonated, and sharing it with someone who might need quiet more than answers. Your attention matters. Use it wisely.